how do you go about crafting the follow-up to Ghost of Tsushima? Like, where do you even start? 10 hours in, I can say with absolute certainty that the decision to set Ghost of Yotei over 2,000 kilometers away from and 300 years after the events of Tsushima was definitely the right call. I want to preface this video with one thing. Ghost of Yotei is not disappointing. I'm certainly missing some elements from Tsushima that help to flesh out the world and the themes, but Yotei is undoubtedly a worthy successor. The most confronting change that Yotei makes is the framework surrounding Atsu, our protagonist, and the story of Hokkaido. Jin's story revolved around confronting traditions, honor versus survival, doing what's needed rather than performing what's expected. We saw Jin evolve from a staunchly rigid samurai, ready to die by and for his code. We were with him throughout his entire journey as he became the Ghost of Tsushima, stalking the shadows and using every conceivable method to his advantage, all in the name of protecting his home. Yotei, on the other hand, thrusts us into the action. Atsu is no samurai and therefore cares little for honor. Her only motive is vengeance. She's brutal, cold, and single-minded. Yotei opens with Atsu approaching the snake, a member of the Yotei Six, a group of ronin seeking to establish their own law by any means necessary and far removed from the eye of the shogun. This opening sequence serves both as our tutorial, reintroducing us to the cadence of combat and setting up Atsu as the Onryo. First things first, I really dislike how we're shown Atsu's journey from child to Onryo, rather than showing us, say, through a cutscene or even a playable segment spanning certain points in her life a la X-Men Origins Wolverine. We're instead told through brushstrokes. As beautiful as it all is, it doesn't help with the pacing, which really feels rushed. Before I knew it, we had a grappling hook. I don't even remember receiving it, we just had it. So far, I haven't actually received any ghost tools, save for a bomb, but that's less ghost and more of a rugby full forward. This could play into the theme, as Atsu is a different type of ghost. She's a wrecking ball, carving her way through to her bloody end. Ghost of Yotei seems to be latching on to spirituality as a means to convey the balance between the consuming nature of revenge and the struggles of humanity. One significant change is the expansion to our arsenal. We now have access to several different weapons. So far, I've unlocked dual katanas and a yari, which specialize in countering particular enemy weapons. I'm a little mixed on this, to be honest, as I'm not really sure why we need different weapon types and what exactly it brings to the table. It's not for buildcraft, because if I wanted to specialize in, say, a katana build, I'd be at a severe disadvantage if I went up against an enemy wielding a yari. It seems to be a feature for feature's sake. Call it the sequel curse, something that plagues all Sony first-party follow-ups. It also doesn't really add much to combat, since I am constantly having to switch between weapons depending on which enemy I happen to be facing. Tsushima's combat was stunning. It required absolute concentration, since even the weakest of enemies could strike you down in 3 cuts. So how do you improve on that? Quite frankly, you can't, but adding in multiple weapon types and asking the player to pay even more attention with an already unforgiving combat loop is so far shaping up to be a bit of a bad call. Another bad call is the loss of the haikus. These were small little moments throughout Tsushima that offered the player a moment of respite and a chance to connect with the island of Tsushima and, by division, Japanese culture. In Yotei, they're replaced with sumie paintings. These are beautiful, don't get me wrong, but there's no freedom here. We use the DualSense's trackpad to follow dotted lines on the screen. By comparison, the haikus from Tsushima gave the player options to craft their own. The entire experience was elevated because it became personal. Yotei is yet to give me that same feeling, quite the opposite actually, and perhaps that plays into the theme of being restrained by rage and blinded by revenge, but I could be huffing a little bit too much copium there. Where Yotei excels and, to be fair, surpasses Tsushima are the visuals. The landscape of Hokkaido is simply beautiful. Just riding through the open plains and having the camera angle fall back and the letterboxing take over gave me this incredible sense of timelessness. I was no longer journeying to a destination. I was riding through the open plains of Japan's past. It made for an interesting juxtaposition when I had Watnabe mode enabled, which adds a lo-fi soundtrack inspired and paying homage to Samurai Champloo. There's also a Teksahi Mikke mode, which I'm yet to try out. Now, if you're not familiar with Teksahi Mikke and his work, his most well-known movie is Ichi the Killer. Whatever you do, don't go looking that up on your work computer. Just know that this game mode adds in more blood and gore and a tighter camera angle, so enemies are more likely to get the jump on you. The hardest part for me to provide any real impressions of is the story, another of Yotei's most poignant changes. You can choose to hunt down each member of the remaining Yotei 6 in whichever order you please. I decided to start with the Oni and the Ishikai Plains. I'm curious, if not concerned, for the pacing, since this seems to be a little bit of a bad move. The Ishikai Plains are massive. I've only got 2 weapons to unlock, so 1 for each member of the Yotei 6. I have bombs with only 1 range slot left, so in terms of progression, I don't really know where we're going to go. Right now, it doesn't feel like everything is equal. Take the Oni himself, who seems to play the largest part in shaping Atsu's story, as he is the one who actively struck the killing blow against her father. How the Kitsune and the dragons can measure up is anybody's guess. One of Tsushima's many strengths was the narrative. Its structure, the plot points, and the destination were handled perfectly. I still remember so many scenes and moments. They leave that lasting impression on me that very few other games managed to do. Right now, I'm struggling to find the matching pieces in Yotei. And you know, maybe that's the whole point. Atsu, alone in her quest for revenge, creates a family around her, her pack. As the journey continues, that pack grows, and perhaps the destination that Atsu is ultimately going to arrive at isn't revenge, it's finding that family, the family that she once lost. It's even reflected in the menu. As you interact with particular NPCs, their form appears, the fog surrounding their image lifts, another chink in Atsu's armor. While we're speaking of menus, Yotei's menu is simply fantastic. It's gorgeous. In fact, one of my notes here simply says, what the fuck is it with Japanese games and their amazing menus? And look, I know Yotei is not a Japanese made game, but it is a Japanese game, so to speak, so I'm not entirely wrong. If it sounds like I'm mixed on Yotei, it's only because I held it to such a high standard. Out of all the modern Sony first-party titles, Ghost of Tshumia was the one that resonated with me the most. Every minute detail, every development decision led to a game that could easily be given the moniker of perfect. And following on from that was always going to be tough. One could argue it's impossible. But I am enjoying Yotei. I'm slowly warming up to the almost arrogant Atsu, and I'm genuinely excited for her journey to continue.